So I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Board of Finance, and we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Begin by sharing that Lisa is not able to join us tonight, and I respect her family's privacy, but they're dealing with some health issues there that she should all be in everyone's thoughts, not her personally, but family members. So think about that. Linda, can we just check on your schedule and cell phone strength? If we have a couple things to vote on, they're not critical, but if you're going to be with us for a while, we'll just go through the regular agenda.
Yep, I can stay with you.
Okay.
I would ask if at all possible, can somebody, sometimes my iPad does weird things, can somebody resend me the packet because it has disappeared once again, and I can't find it.
All right, we'll have Amy do that.
Email that to me, that'd be great.
Great, good. All right. We have a lot to cover tonight, and an important topic for the Board of Finance in preparing for the tri-board, but we want to get through some of the presentations at the beginning. So why don't we just jump right in and have the Board of Ed enrollment overview update. And I think, Neil, you're going to do that, or?
Yeah, I think that's the plan.
Okay.
So we pulled a couple of slides out of the slightly larger presentation that I did for the Board of Ed. As this board knows, October 1 is the reporting date that we always have in terms of enrollment. So while these slides are about enrollment, what I'll also address is my understanding through Amy is that there were some questions from members of your board about associated staffing for this year, particularly related to COVID expenses. So I'll try to cover that in my comments as well. So I'll go quickly and leave it more open for questions, but there's just a handful of slides to go through here. This is in terms of enrollment for this year. If you look on the far left column, our enrollment ended up being slightly below 4,000 students, which was a surprise for us at 3,960 students on October 1st, whereas a year ago it was 65 students higher than that. At the top of the slide, I can tell you that 20 students down from last year was definitely a surprise. We were expecting to see an uptick in students in terms of our enrollment. And I'll get to that in a moment in terms of some of the COVID-related factors that we think are contributing to that. Whereas the 45 students down at the high school was completely not a surprise in that the graduating class of 12th grade that was going out was simply larger than the 9th grade class coming in. And that's part of the long-term downward trend that has almost worked its way all the way through the school system. It only has a couple more years to play out at the high school at this point. So if we go forward, Amy, I can talk about the fact that there was no single elementary school that felt a real impact of the fewer students. As you can see here, all of the elementary schools, I don't think it's ever happened to me before, but Central School came in at exactly the same number as it was a year ago, and all the others were within single digits of where they were a year ago. So we did not see a real trend related to this, although when we move to what the projections had been, you will see that it impacted our larger schools. So switching from the comparison from what it was actually a year ago to what our Malone and McBroom projections were. So now on the left-hand side, we're looking at projections, and you can see once again 4,025. So I want to talk about that number at the bottom left-hand side. Our enrollment last year was 4,025, and that was also the projection for Malone and McBroom. So they were expecting completely flat enrollment. So to be 65 below that was definitely surprising. And more than all of that comes at the elementary level. When you look at the K-6 overall, we were 77 below the projections. And it was the largest schools that contributed to the bulk of that. And that you can see that Latimer Lane was 26 below projected. In some ways, due to the strain in that building, that was probably fortunate that the population came in below projected. And in our largest school, as a percentage of the population, it's not that big, but always Squadron Line is, as the largest school, going to feel, in terms of raw numbers, the greatest variability. So middle school and high school are not notable on this particular slide in terms of where they stand. But to be 65 below projection was definitely surprising. And in a moment, I think you'll see that almost all of that came through our youngest students. So this is the slide that demonstrates that. Malone and McBroom gave us a projection in kindergarten of 294 students. And on October 1st, we had yielded 252 students. And in addition to that, 13 fewer first graders that had been projected. So out of the overall 65 that was below projection, 55 of it comes in the two lowest grades in the sequence in kindergarten and first grade. So there's a little more to dig into there. Mostly, it's a belief that under the current circumstances of COVID-19, that many kindergarten families may have chosen simply not to send their approximately 5-year-old to school and say, we're going to hold back for another year. We're going to wait to enroll until a year from now. And interestingly, families that choose to do that can choose to enroll their student in kindergarten, or kindergarten is actually not a compulsory grade. So they could keep their student at home for kindergarten and then say, you know what, we're comfortable with where our child is in terms of numbers and letters and being able to read words and short books, and we're going to put them right to first grade, even though they didn't attend kindergarten. So there's going to be some unpredictability given what we're seeing with these less than expected numbers in kindergarten and first grade. The only other thing I'll note on this slide that's interesting to me, I don't know if it will be interesting to you, but if you look at 9th grade, 19 above projection, 8th to 9th grade, because that's a year where people have more options to potentially send students to a Westminster or a Loomis Chaffee or a Northwest Catholic or something else in terms of the private world, private school world. We did not see a dip of our student body. So the projection accounts for a normal attrition from 8th to 9th grade, and yet we didn't see it this year, potentially with families saying, we're not gonna spend private school dollars for a experience in this potentially remote or hybrid world. So couple more to go through. You can see, I just wanted to show you this in that 65 below projection. It's been quite a few years. You got to go all the way back to the bottom of the slide when we were seeing projections. At that time, it was from a company called NASDAQ as opposed to Malone and McBroom, where our projections were coming in, our enrollment was coming in below projections. So it's been quite a few years since we've seen a low projection, and obviously want to see if that's a one-year blip on the radar or whether that's a new trend.
All the pollsters were off this year, Neil.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And certainly all, I know that all of the suburban towns in our comparison group had low kindergarten numbers. So I've already been able to do that comparison. This is a slide we always show the Board of Finance about where we've been in the last 5 years. So going back to 2016, you can see 4,110 students and now 3,960, which represents a 3.8% decrease, which across 7 schools and 4,000 students, we have definitely yield staffing savings from that, but not necessarily equal to the 3.8% decline, given that it's across multiple buildings. This is where I really wanted to talk about the complexity of this year and understanding where we were with creating a distance learning environment. And we were required by the state of Connecticut to provide a distance learning experience for any families who opted for that. And at the elementary school, I think we were surprised that out of approximately 2,000 students, it was a full 20% of families or 20% of the students from the families that chose to start their students in distance learning this year. So 400 students would actually represent our, if you think about it, it's our second largest elementary school now after Squadron Line this year. And to make sure you understand the model, these are students that were removed from their home school, so to speak, and placed in an environment with a only distance learning teacher, and they log in with only distance learning students. So what this required was a significant shift of staffing to staff 19 teachers in this environment. So that was one factor, that 19 staff members were required to create these classroom sections in distance learning. And in addition to that, we were left to look at the live, how many students were left in front of a live teacher at each of the elementary schools. And for reasons of social distancing and the classroom spaces, we settled upon a number of about 18 students that could fit in each of the classrooms in our school system. It was pretty consistent across the 5 elementary buildings because 18 students would allow you to achieve the kind of social distancing you needed based on the recommendations. So overall, what I can tell you in terms of associated staffing is that we added 7 new positions at the elementary level this year. Just to talk those through, 2 of them were originally budgeted. We knew that Squadron Line and Latimer Lane were experiencing some enrollment increases based on cohorts moving forward. And in the past budget, 2 of those positions were accounted for. 5 positions were added in the summer in order to accomplish both our social distancing goals for the live classrooms, and we needed to add 1 distance learning classroom actually after the school year started because of how popular that format became. So we added 7 new staff to make this happen in the COVID-related world. And what I wanted to share tonight is that out of those 7, I told you 5 were added in the summer and the fall. All 5 of those contracts were offered as interim contracts on a 1-year basis, with no expectation that those positions would move forward into the next budget year. So all 5 of those teachers understand that, and that it was a contract offered in order to help us achieve the conditions that would allow us to keep safety in mind during the pandemic as we work through this school year. One last slide that before I take your questions. The middle school and high school also have a distance learning format. The reason why that didn't impact associated staffing is because at the secondary level where kids take multiple classes, the format of the distance learning is different in that in those instances, the students actually do a meeting much like this meeting, where they join their math classroom and their social studies classroom and their science classroom. So we did no extra staffing. This is all done through technology to account for the approximately 300 students who are in a completely distance learning format. But on the right-hand side of the slide, what I tracked for our board and now your board is completely homeschooled students. A homeschool student is different than a distance learning student in that what you do when you're homeschooled is you completely unenroll your child from the Simsbury Public Schools. You're no longer accessing our curriculum. You're choosing to kind of go independent and do it on your own. And you can see over the last 4 years before this, we've had right at 20 students in Simsbury who have chosen that option. And that number more than doubled this year, where 46 students on October 1st. I can tell you that number has actually increased by a handful since October 1st. And the note on the bottom of that says that we had 20 students last year in homeschooling. 2 of them left the district, so there were 18 returning students, leaving 28 new who chose homeschooling, and 3/4 of those were primary students, kindergarten through 3. So we believe that most of those students will come back once we're out of the pandemic because they had not been homeschoolers before. So we're counting on most of those 28 students who were new homeschoolers to be coming back into the school system, hopefully for next year. So that was sort of what we prepared for tonight, but I know board members had questions and I'm happy to spend a few minutes answering them.
Actually, Neil, before you do that, something that I thought was really interesting that I thought the board should hear about is the staff that you had to repurpose. So even though we did hire an additional 7, there are a lot of hires that we didn't have to do because you were able to utilize current staff. Can you just speak to that for a second?
Absolutely. So there were, we knew that whether students chose distance learning or that we needed to try to reduce our class size to that approximately 18, that it was going to take additional staffing, and there was no way to hire that many teachers. It would have been over 20. So we took 16 teachers that were, these were people in non-classroom roles, really important roles, but they were reading intervention teachers, math coaches, language arts consultants. We took a library media specialist who had classroom certification, and we repurposed them and called them over the summer and said, we know that that's been the job that you've done for the last several years, but what we need this year is for you to be a 3rd grade teacher or a 2nd grade teacher. And so 16 different FTE were repurposed to classroom positions. So if I demonstrate what the overall elementary FTE looks like, it looks like it's up an enormous number of like 20 teachers, but it's not. It's up those 5 because we repurposed the other teachers from different non-teaching but really important positions.
Well, I'll start just say thank you for the update, Neil. Really appreciate it. I think this board is always very keenly interested in new students and new teachers and how you handle all of that. But I think the task you guys were given because of COVID and because of the state mandates to prepare to teach our young children, 3 different ways. And be ready to do any of them on a moment's notice. I think really the flexibility that you guys demonstrated is pretty awesome from my seat. And I'm not going to give you a bad time that when we went, we had extra kindergartners. We got teachers last year, and this year we have less, and we didn't. I completely get what you guys have been through and appreciate it. I think be important as we move forward to just maintain that kind of same aggressive attitude for using all the resources we have the most efficiently way we can. And sounds like your student teacher ratio for the distance learning kids is still about 18 to 20 per classroom. Is that, I'm taking 400 by 20 teachers and doing that math
Right.
in my head, but is that
so
fair?
While we use that ratio of 18 to 1 for social distancing purposes for the live classrooms, we stuck with the normal class size guidelines for distance learning. So there's
Okay.
some of those classrooms that have 24 or 25 kids.
Okay, cool. It's not cool, but it's
Yeah.
it's what it is. It's great. I really appreciate the update. Anybody else have any specific questions for Neil?
I have a couple.
Good.
It's Linda. And first, let me just reiterate what Rob said. I know the schools have been faced with a tremendous challenge, and everything I hear is that you guys have really risen to that challenge, and very appreciative of all the work you've done pulling together things in a tough time. I've been away, so I have one little quick question. Is are they back in school full time now, or still doing the split schedule?
So everybody K through 8 is, if you chose to be in-person learning as opposed to distance learning, you are back in school full time. So all 5 elementary
But the high school
schools
kids, yeah,
and the middle school are back in school full time, with the exception of Mondays at the middle school, which we use as a remote learning day because the kids touch base briefly with all 8 of their teachers. And then the teachers have some time in the afternoon to particularly connect with the students who are only distance learners. So that's how we're working it 5 days a week for the elementary students. The high school, with the complications of high school schedules and the way that high school students can't be easily cohorted or put into exact groups, we've kept the high school in a hybrid. So if you are a high school student, you all learn remotely on Mondays, and then half come to school on Tuesday and Wednesday, and the other half come to school on Thursday and Friday. So that right now, high school remains in hybrid, and quite frankly, where we are with the uptick in cases, we think that's probably where we are for at least through the rest of this year.
Yeah. Okay. That's too bad to hear, but I mean, I totally understand. My other question is, are the projections that you had, is that what was used for Tektron in all of the capital planning stuff where we thought we'd have an increase of 300 students in the coming years? And I get that COVID obviously wasn't known at the time you were starting.
Right.
So that threw a monkey wrench in things. But is it the same company that did the projections for them as did the projections that you have here?
Yes. So the subcontractor with what we call the Tecton study, but the subcontractor on demographics was Malone and McBroom. So all of their work was based on the original study that was done in 2 years ago. What we do, so that was a much more in-depth study in terms of looking at specific addresses and really drilling down to live births and particular addresses of where kids are at. And then what you do each year is a process where once that heavy lifting is done, you roll the projections forward. So we still use Malone and McBroom for that process, but it's not nearly at the expense it was for the Tecton projections.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks.
Thanks, Linda. Anybody else? Derek? Art?
Just thanks for all the work, Neil.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're obviously, you got your hands full in a normal year, and you got a whole bunch of extra factors thrown in. So good for being flexible and delivering the quality.
Great. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right. All right. I think we're good with Neil. Thank you.
Yep.
All right.
All right. Moving to our next agenda item.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Neil, you're welcome to stay. These meetings they're seriously.
You know what? Amy gives us a great update after you guys are done. So I'll wait for that.
All right.
Have a good night.
Next up is approval of the minutes. For those of you that weren't on the call earlier, we want to congratulate Karen. She has a new position, and so this will be her last meeting doing these copious notes for us. Excellent.
Oh no!
Excellent work.
You can't leave.
No, that's
You're
what we
the
told
best
her.
we've had in ages.
Sorry.
Exactly. So
Well, she's coming to the town full time, so her talents are not lost. They're just different area.
So,
well, maybe Karen, you can do a Vulcan mind meld with whoever comes next.
I'll try.
Great. Any other comments on the minutes? I'd be looking for a motion to accept the minutes.
I'll move to accept.
So moved.
Moved by Art, seconded by Linda. All in favor, say aye.
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 That passes unanimously. Amy, Finance Director's report.
So starting only a couple things, just your typical list of updated grants and donations, and then just moving on to the COVID. On the town side, quick, you'll see that since the last time I reported, the expenditures for fiscal year 21 have increased about 15,000. This mainly related to the election supplies and the poll workers and election workers that were needed through the town clerk's office and the registrar's office to accommodate the presidential election. Like I noted previously, the prior year loss that was related to COVID was covered by the prior year savings that we had. So the current year loss estimated thus far is covered at this point. We're still expecting funding from the state of $55,800. And then we've already received some funding from the state related to elections. We're expected to get $13,738. And then we had another private grant for $8,682. So it's a total of $78,220 that's available right now to cover our COVID costs. So, and that doesn't include any FEMA funding that we've applied for. That process has been extremely slow. We don't know what we're getting, what we're not getting. So I'm not counting on that right now, but just so you know that it could come at some point. And then moving on to the Board of Education side, since the last time I reported, there's an increase of about $16,000 compared to the last time I had reported out. The majority of this is related to an increase in PP&E, and then we also did a a longer term on the tents. They're utilizing tents over at the middle school and the high school to assist with social distancing, and they've actually been really successful. So the principals had requested to keep those tents through until Thanksgiving, so we were able to extend that contract. On the funding side of things, we do have state funding related to the Board of Education, which actually already has been applied for and approved. So between the state funding and then a small use of the non-lapsing fund, the board is in good shape and will probably see an estimated $264,000 remaining in the non-lapsing at this point. Any questions on that? Okay. Should I just move into budget status, Rob?
Yeah, please.
Okay. It's going to share my screen. It's easier for me to talk.
Yeah.
Okay, so on the general fund, on the revenue side of things, a couple things I wanted to point out. So at the bottom, you'll see that we're about $51,900,000 into revenues at this point of the year. As of September 30th, about 51% of revenues. You can see that the majority of increases as you go down the line is your tax department, which is your increase in property taxes from the mill rate and new developments. And then down here we have the building department, which is actually already at 65% of its revenue budget to date. Well, 57 overall, but the permit line is 65%. Let me clarify that. As you can see, compared to the same time last year, we're already $140,000 above and beyond the revenue. So the building department is doing good with their revenue related to their permits. On the finance side, not doing as well. Unfortunately, our investment income is not at the same level it was in the prior year due to the decreasing interest rates. So there is a decline there compared to the same time last year. And then the last area I just wanted to speak to is the town clerk. You'll see that compared to the same time last year, it's about almost a $52,000 increase. We're still seeing like the housing boom and an increase in the recording fees. They're actually already at 50% of their revenue budget. And then in addition to that, we have, like I previously mentioned during the COVID update, we received some grant funding from the state to accommodate some additional workers that assisted the town clerk's office during the election season. Moving on to expenditures. There wasn't anything major here. We are currently at about 22% of expenditures, which given this time of year is in line with expectations. There was only one line that kind of stuck out to me as significantly under compared to the same time last year. That was with the police department. So when I broke this down, the decrease was related to some savings in the overtime line item. And then there was a large purchase in gasoline last year that was just non-recurring as of yet for this year. So that's related to the decrease. Moving on to the Simsbury Farms Fund. This point in the year, we're seeing revenues in excess of expenditures of almost $140,000. You'll see along the lines here with our special programs, the day camps, and the pool in particular, that our revenues are not as significant as they were the same time last year. However, we know this is related to COVID, the decrease in participation, and the changes in programs that we've had to make to accommodate the COVID. And then down in the expenditures, you'll see basically the same offset since we had a decrease in the usage of our programs and facilities. There's also a corresponding decrease in expenditures. The only exception is the golf course, which had a large expenditure, a piece of large equipment, a piece of machinery that they purchased early on in the year. So that is the reason for the increase of the $92,000.
So, Amy, I have a question about that. What's your expectation? The 3 summer months, July, August, and September, but for revenues to have exceeded expenditures by $140,000 so far in this fund, what is your prediction for how that's going to play out the rest of the year?
So,
Is that indicative? I mean, would you have expected that? Is that typical at this time of the year that you'd have such a big surplus?
yeah, it's usually typical that we have some sort of a surplus into the summer months, as we have all of the camps, and then it'll start to dwindle as the time goes by. But so for the special programs and the day camps, just seeing those decreases in revenues, those are pretty much going to be in line throughout the year, I would assume, just because we'd have to wait till next summer to get through. We'd have to go to next fiscal year where we would have the camps again as well. The special programs, maybe there might be an uptick in the spring. I mean, honestly, I think it depends on what the virus does, if we get the vaccine.
Right.
And then the same thing with the pool when we open back up in the spring, are we still going to be under the COVID restrictions or not? And then, the golf course, that's always, touch and go. We saw a significant increase this year because there just wasn't much else to do. So are we going to see that next year, or are we going to have, some bad weather and it's going to be impacted? So I don't really know if I have a solid prediction at this point, but I think related to the day camps, we're pretty much are where we are. And I don't think that's going to change much. The special programs might change, and then the use of the pool might change, and golf depending on weather and COVID. But honestly, until we know what's going to happen with the COVID, I don't really have any solid predictions.
Yeah. Okay. So this we'll come back to this later on in the agenda, I'm assuming, when we get to, I'm not sure what point. I don't have the. I'm scrolling through here looking for the agenda, but. I think Art and I would like to give a bit of a report on what's going on with the Parks and Recs Special Revenue Fund Commission, temporary commission. We did finish that, and this number of being so much in the black will certainly have an impact on how things get viewed.
Yeah. So if
once
you
we
look
get to that point.
If you don't have your packet in front of you, I can just show you. It's up on my screen. So the same time last year, we had a surplus of almost $270,000. And as you know,
okay, that was my question. At the same time last year, so this is sort of typical that we would be up this much at this point of the year.
And then it typically dwindles.
Okay.
As the year goes on. Yep.
Okay.
And the
Perfect.
main delta between this year and last year was the camps. We're much right.
Yep.
Right.
Okay, and then
okay, thanks, Amy.
You're welcome. And then moving on to the health insurance fund, you can see that we have a current surplus of about $30,000 right now. And then, the main driver I like to show here is just what our reserve is at. So right now our reserve is about 4.7 million. We're at 32% of expected claims. And as you've heard me say over and over again, our target is about 20 to 25% of expected claims. So typically, if we were in a good, normal, healthy year, probably by year end, we could have the discussion of what to do about that overage. But right now, a lot of procedures, doctor's appointments, et cetera, were canceled due to COVID. So we're waiting to see this year to see if we have an uptick in those claims as, COVID gets rectified and people start going back to the doctors. Are we going to need that reserve? So we're not recommending anything for that right now. We're just going to keep an eye on it. And
I know we ask this every year, but are there health savings accounts, and are those on a calendar or on a fiscal year basis?
Those are on a calendar year basis.
Yeah. So this could definitely uptick between now and the end of the year, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yep. Oh, actually,
so Amy,
I'm lying. It's on a fiscal year basis, I think. Maria, correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was the last place I was at on a calendar year basis. This was fiscal year because we do tend to see an uptick towards the end of the year, I think. Let me get back to it.
The calendar year or the fiscal year?
We typically see an uptick. I believe it is on the calendar year.
That would be normal, but
yeah. All right, yeah,
in any event, I think the conclusion to not do anything right now is appropriate. Anybody feel differently?
Can I? Yeah. Well, I just have I'd like to know what our options are for bringing it back down. Not that I think we necessarily should bring it down to 20 to 25 at this point, but while I agree that there's been a lot of, there probably is some pent up demand that will, come forth in the future. A lot of what's been averted in expenses are routine things that don't become pent up demand. For example, if you get your teeth cleaned once a year, when you finally go back, you're not going to get them cleaned twice next year. You're still going to get it cleaned once a year. So that one exam or, physical or teeth cleaning or GYN exam or all those kinds of things where you had a cold or upset stomach, all those kinds of things that are, they go away. They don't necessarily become pent up demand. So while, some of the decline will come back in the future, not all of it will. So there may be some room for some portion of this extra savings to be moved somewhere else. And I don't know what the options are for what we could do with it, but I'd like to know what those are, because I don't think it will all get sucked up in the future. I mean, yes, if you needed a knee replacement and you decided, well, I'm going to wait for a year and a half or two, and you're going to get that done. But if you just were feeling lousy or you didn't have your annual physical, you're not going to necessarily do two of them in the following year. Does that make sense?
So it does, and I think we're going to get it. I mean, we're 3 months into a 12-month fiscal year, so I think we will have the option maybe for our next meeting, or at some point, Amy, you could just tell us, what the process is to move the money from these reserves back to the general fund or wherever else we might use them.
Yeah,
But for the time being, I'm not recommending
advocating that. Right.
Yeah, I hear.
I agree. I'm not advocating that. I want to know what the options are for future discussion. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So we can talk about that during the budget process as we start to analyze our health insurance numbers. If we see that reserve is going to be big, perhaps we want to, offset our premiums and not increase the premiums as much. Maybe we want to give it to the general fund, the capital fund. So yeah, I can provide that for you.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
Good.
I think those were all of the highlights I wanted to touch on, unless somebody else has any other questions on any of the other statements that were provided.
We appreciate the detail. All right. Anything else on the budget or status? Maybe at this point, I would ask, Linda, I think this was on me. I was supposed to put your discussion on the agenda, and I failed to do so. So I think
before you go there,
yeah.
Is the stuff about the capital projects? Is that I'm just scrolling through on my iPad, so I can't see the agenda as well as the pages at the same time. So, are you all done with that part too, or are we going to talk about the capital project funds?
We're going to talk about all of that as part of the tri-board preparation, which is the main part of what we want to get to. But I'm trying to get rid of, not get rid of, but I want to get the other things dealt with before we get into that.
Sure.
All right.
Yep.
So why don't we, I would ask then Linda and Art, if you want to just give us a report on the Parks and Rec Task Force or however you want to describe it, where you guys are.
Sure. I'll take a shot at that, and Art can chime in if he's got anything he wants to add. So we had a few meetings, and I'll tell you sort of how I looked at the problem versus how some of the other folks on the committee looked at the problem. There were some differences of opinion. So we looked at a 5-year annual average shortfall. In other words, expenses minus revenue. Over 5 years, averaged $266,000. Over 5 years, the average annual subsidy from the general fund, which includes that $180 that we've given the last few years up front, averaged $269,000. So let's call it $270,000. That's how I saw it as the problem to solve, is that, okay, each year you're coming in on average with a $270,000 shortfall. In addition to that, we're looking forward, there is an issue of, if we make pension changes, there's another $20,000 they expect as a shortfall. And then there's the impact of the minimum wage changes, which adds another $37,000. So that grand total is $327,000. That's how I define, and kind of Art and I define, what is the problem we're trying to solve. Now, the other four people on the committee who were from the Parks and Recs Commission and the Board of Selectmen define the problem differently. They see it as a situation, and I'm not disputing this at all, that some years back, many years back, a number of positions and expenses were allocated to that special revenue fund that you could argue were not appropriate allocations. Nobody's ever done a proper time and motion study to figure out what percentage of Tom's salary or benefits, for example, should be in the Simsbury Farms budget item versus the other parts of Parks and Recs. So what they want to do is look at all of those things that they want to reallocate back to the Board of Selectmen. So they define the problem as all of those things, and that adds up to $514,000. So the issue, there's sort of two issues here. One is, how do you define the problem? The way I define it, which is what are the shortfalls that we're trying to fix, versus this sort of equity issue of what's a fair allocation. And secondly, perhaps the bigger problem is who should pay, whatever that shortfall is, who should bear the burden of that cost? Should it be the users of those programs like golf, swimming, skating, summer camps, or should it be all taxpayers who pick up the shortfalls? Art and I felt that the problem, as I said, was really the past shortfalls, and the other four were more focused on the equity issue. I proposed a solution. I was kind of alone in the room with this idea of trying to solve what I saw, the $327,000 problem, by having all three entities represented in the room be part of the solution. So $180,000, that's easy because we already build that into the budget every year anyway. $86,000, I alone considered the possibility of us changing our collection rate assumption by 1/10 of a point, which would produce $86,000 that could be used, keeping in mind that we end up on the back end giving it to them anyway. So it's, in a way, more honest to fund it up front than it is to, in essence, budget a known loss every year. And that another $60,000 could come from fee increases or from cuts in other parts of the Board of Selectmen budget. The other four committee members didn't like that idea and wanted, again, to solve the larger problem of $514,000 and move a bunch of administration, facility costs, move the entire budget for the rink, for the pool, and for the summer camps, move all of that into the Board of Selectmen budget, and not have any fee increases, and fund all of those new expenses to the Board of Selectmen through taxes. This is important in relation to the tri-board discussion because they want to be held harmless. You know, if we give them a 1% guidance, they want this $514,000 increase to the Board of Selectmen to not be counted against that 1%. And Art and I were not on board with that at all. So that's kind of how we ended. Art, did I hit everything?
Yeah, no, you did it very well. I mean, I guess the overriding point for me, this is underscoring, not correcting, was I just did not feel at all comfortable agreeing to a revenue increase for this coming year without knowing what the other priorities of the Board of Selectmen are. I mean, this is going to be a very difficult year to have a budget increase. And to agree right out of the box to tie the hands of two Board of Finance members saying, yep, we've agreed to a revenue increase at the expense of a fee increase before we ever get to our tri-board and the overall, was something I just was not comfortable with. So I guess, Linda, the end of this was we agreed we couldn't agree. It's just as simple as that.
Right.
You and I, representing the Board of Finance, said, no, we're not going to sign on to a revenue increase until the Board of Selectmen does its job and says, overall, this is how we are presenting our budget, and these are our priorities, and these are not. And that's how it ended.
Right. I do want to add that I personally am very sympathetic to the equity issue that the other four members identified. That I do agree that at an earlier time there were some allocations made that didn't make sense, but I couldn't, for all the reasons Art just stated, couldn't get on board with what was being recommended.
So I also had a chance to talk to Linda about this, and I think I understand the situation. I do think that we need to consider this against all of the priorities, which is, if I think that's what I hear you saying, Art, is that
Yeah.
there shouldn't be
in the context of the budget,
a no foul, hold harmless for this transfer of expenses back. I think I did take exception with Linda's suggestion to use an alteration in the collection rate assumption. I think that's not the heart of the issue. The issue to me is, how much do we want to spend out of all of the taxpayers' money for parks and rec, golf, ice rink, all of the programs and everything, and how much of it should be borne out of fees? The question that Linda posed, which is, the pay to play, or fees for use versus taxpayers. I think there is some amount that the town taxpayers should pay for the amenities of having the facility and the ability and the management of a Parks and Rec department. But I also think that we need to try to cover that by the people that use the pool and the golf the best we can. And I'm not convinced that we're necessarily doing that. And I don't think there should be a zone in which you get to put the money and not have it counted against the increases in overall for the taxpayers. Unless you've had that fulsome conversation about that being a priority over, and pick any of 100 things that come down the list that the town has to budget. So
I will again say I am sympathetic to the allocation issue, because while I do believe fees should cover a majority of the costs, I think there were some allocations made years ago that were not fair. I mean, to put all of Tom's salary and benefits, for example, into Simsbury Farms, I mean, he obviously spends a whole lot of time on a lot of other stuff. So, I mean, there are some things that need to be fixed there. But of course, I mean, and they're right when they say, well, you say this every year, but this year is a particularly bad year to be trying to, add more stuff to the Board of Selectmen budget, which is already looking like it's going to be way over whatever guidance we come up with. So, I mean, basically what Art and I said was, you've got to find ways to deal with this within the Board of Selectmen budget. And I felt strongly that there should be some fee increases, and I didn't find a warm welcome for that idea either.
Mr. Chairman, there are certain, you come onto this new, and I was a newbie. There's some history to this that you kind of stumble over and you come in. And one, I don't fully understand, but Linda has referred to it twice now as allocations of the past that were not necessarily what they should have been. And okay, that's one. And I know it's there, and I couldn't explain fully what it is. The second is, there's almost a philosophical, sometimes even theological presumption that the allocation should be as follows. this was explicitly stated, if the funds were going to support a capital expenditure by the town, they should go through and be fulsome. Whether it's the hockey rink, the library, the swimming pool, the golf. Well, I'm not sure that just because the town invested it in the first place, that it has an obligation to allocate every year a certain amount of its revenue to its upkeep. I mean, they aren't all the same thing, and the circumstances change. So there were some different emotions on this, and I think the healthiest thing to do, frankly, is just to say this is part of a larger problem that we're about to get into, in which our jobs are going to become difficult and unpleasant, which is, what is the overall budget for the year to be? And go ahead, Board of Selectmen, you fit what you think that right number is into that overall budget, and we'll deal with it.
Right, I agree.
So let me ask, if we so what actions did the task force or committee take, or are they going to take? What happens next?
There were no next actions, to my knowledge, other than that they're hoping to move, as I said, the administration and facility costs and the rink and the pool and the camps into the Board of Selectmen budget. But of course, we were a committee of representatives of other committees, and none of us could commit any of those other committees to do anything in particular. So, there's no action taken by this committee, only recommendations. And so it really kind of depends now on what the Board of Selectmen is willing to do. While Sean and Chris were supporters of moving all of those expenses into the Board of Selectmen, I don't know if the other 4 members of the Board of Selectmen will welcome all those new costs into their budgets with open arms, given everything that's going on.
Okay, so just Amy, will you make a note? We got to be sure that somehow this fits into the discussion at the tri-board, because it seems a lot about geography to me of where the money goes. I think there's really 2 things we need to do: is how much should we, as a town, allocate of taxpayers' money for these amenities, and how much should be allocated to expenditures, and what, and not spend all this time arguing about allocations and whether it's on this side or the other side. I know some of the history. The golf course was always, there are people there that thought they were producing a profit, and they wanted to take some of that profit and reinvest it in the golf course to make it a better place, a better golf course. And they were, every time they made a little more money, then somebody else was on their payroll, and so that's some of the history of this, but it doesn't change the overall fact that it's costing taxpayers and the people who use it. And we need to find a better balance between those two and not spend all the time. But I don't think you get a free pass by just moving the stuff from this fund into another fund and not get it counted against the overall budget. That just doesn't seem like that makes sense to me either. So
right.
Stay tuned. All right.
So I will make one last little plea for, I know, a useless effort here, because it won't be embraced by the rest of you. But, to the extent that we know that in most years, if we only give them $180,000 up front, that we're going to wind up taking money out of the general fund reserves at the end of the year. At a certain point, it becomes a lie to budget that way. I mean, it's not an honest budget if you know that they're not going to be able to make ends meet with what you're giving them up front. And so that's why I was suggesting, it really has no impact on the taxpayer at all. If you say, look, we're going to set the tax collection rate so that it produces $1 million a year, and then we know at the end of the year we're always going to give $100,000 to the Parks and Recs Commission, you might as well set the tax collection rate so that it produces $900,000 a year, and you give them that $100,000 up front. That's just a more honest way of budgeting, in my personal opinion. But
Wouldn't it be up
that's
to
my
the
2 cents.
Wouldn't it be up to the selectmen to put it into their budget?
No,
Yeah, I
the
think-
collection rate is ours.
No, I
That's
meant,
our
but,
decision.
but if we're constantly running short $180,000, it should be in the selectmen's budget.
So the
Well, the
conversation really,
$180,000.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but to me, there are two different conversations here. And it's and we have this almost every year. Should we continue to budget with a 98.5% collection rate, knowing that we will probably collect more than that? Or should we not? And that's a different, but what I really think we should not, the slippery slope we should not start down is using the first $100,000 for this fund, because there'll be a long line at our door for other people to use the balance of it. And I think that's my objection to it, Linda. Not that it's right that we do it this way, but that we can't just fix this one little problem because the library will be here next, and the parks. I mean, the street plowing will be next, and it's just. And to the extent that we have that money and we use it appropriately or not is a different conversation about than applying it here, in my mind, anyway.
Good.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
That's to be continued forever.
I know. I do feel badly for them because they've been through this sort of discussion multiple times and never seem to get anywhere.
Well, this is a great segue to the appropriation for the ice rink refrigerator then.
Yes.
Any questions? We basically, you want to tee this up, Amy? I mean, the money's been spent. We need to appropriate it, right?
Yeah. So basically, in order to open the ice rink, we had planned to do work on the refrigeration condensing unit. Unfortunately, after taking it out, the steel supporting the unit was in very poor condition, which I attached a picture within the packet so that you could see. So in order to replace the steel to put it in a better condition, it cost about $13,000. And so we are seeking an additional appropriation to pay for that.
So I have a question about why. I mean, obviously, looking at the picture, this didn't happen suddenly. Why was this an emergency? And why didn't we get notified beforehand? Because I believe that's what the policy requires.
As far as being notified beforehand, I can't speak to that. The work was authorized because we needed it in order to open the rink.
So I won't belabor the point, but it just would have required a phone call from perhaps Maria to Rob. Were you aware in advance?
Oh, we were
Rob,
aware of this. We were aware of this a few weeks ago. Yeah, when it was happening.
but not before the expenditure.
I don't know about
Or
that.
you were aware. Okay. So it's just something to keep in mind for the future that, this was coming out of the Capital Reserve Fund. Is that the idea?
That's the recommendation.
Yeah. So when we created that Capital Reserve Fund, there was a lot of discussion about wanting to make sure it wasn't used as a slush fund to do whatever. And that, only in the case of a real emergency would the town manager be able to tap that fund, and it would be contingent upon an immediate phone call to the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen. So just, this is all new, so we're just learning new protocols, but for the future, that should happen.
Understood.
What I think I hear you saying, Linda, is that this piece didn't suddenly fall off. It was eroded over time, right?
Well, that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if the refrigeration unit was on top of the steel beam, and once they got the refrigeration unit off, then it was a rusty beam. So
Right,
I make a
that's
motion
another-
to approve the transfer.
Need a second.
Second.
Yep.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Hey, I'm sorry to do this, but for whatever reason, my audio wasn't working. I just want to go back for a second to the item that wasn't on the agenda. Were there minutes at the meeting, or is there something that we can look at in preparation for a further discussion on Simsbury Farms? Because I know it's going to be heated. And then is there another meeting coming up, or is this just in the Board of Selectmen's hands?
There's no more meetings.
Right. There's no.
And I
Go ahead, Linda.
and I believe that Sean took minutes.
There are
Okay.
minutes also recorded.
I tried to take good notes on the numbers. It's just, it would help if we had, just something to look at to follow along. So, but I appreciate the commentary, and I understand what's going on. It's
Yeah.
just, okay.
I apologize, Derek. I'm in a campground right now, so
Nice.
I'm doing the best I can.
No, of course. So thank you for bringing us through that. I do have some notes. I just didn't know what the next steps were, but it sounds like we'll hear about it. So thank you.
Yep. You're welcome.
All right. I'll take part of the responsibility because I was supposed to have gotten this on the agenda. So enough blame to go all the way around. All right. Moving to the next item, which is on the agenda. If I can find my copy of the agenda, is the police private duty fund transfer.
So this is something that has been on the agenda a few times already. So the question was put to Bob whether we need formal approval for the transfer to go back to the general fund or just for it to go to the capital reserve. And so last time he had stated that in order for it to revert back to the general fund, it would need to go through the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen. Linda and Lisa thought that this sounded odd, so we went back to Bob. Rob and Lisa and I met with Bob, and he was in fact misspoken. And so we can request it to go to the Capital Reserve Fund. And if that's the case, then yes, it does need the Board of Selectmen's approval as well. And if there is no approval, then it does automatically revert back to the general fund.
So, Amy, I have a question. Didn't the Board of Finance already vote to send it to either the Capital Reserve Fund or let it revert to the general fund? Didn't we already vote on this?
No, we were waiting for the
we tabled it. We tabled it one more time at the last meeting to get this clarification from Bob. And Bob, I was on that call. Bob reconsidered when we posed the question more or less the way you had, Linda, and then agreed with where we finally ended up.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we should go ahead and make this transfer.
Agreed.
I need a motion.
So moved.
In a second. Someone?
This is to transfer it to the Capital Reserve Fund.
right.
Correct.
Yeah, I'll second that.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 All right.
So the Board of Selectmen already did vote on this, though, and they did not vote to send it there.
No, so you
Is
all
that correct, Amy?
no, so you all are making the recommendation, and then now it will go to the Board of Selectmen.
Oh, I thought they already voted on it. Okay,
Nope.
and wanted to keep it in the police department.
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Next up is the tri-board preparation discussion.
Can I just interject before you get there? Because I know this is a quick thing, but we didn't actually go through all of the capital, that spreadsheet of capital stuff, or you're doing that in the context of a tri-board?
Which sheet are you talking about specifically, Linda?
They're landscape sheets that show town projects,
No.
the balance and how much. We sort of skipped over that. That was after all of the
This
funds,
is part of the
review of the funds.
The budget
This is-
status report, yep.
Yeah. It's part of the budget status. I'm sorry, I misunderstood when you asked me before. I thought you were referring to the bar-pedging graphs that are part of the tri-board.
No.
Okay.
I just have a quick comment, and it's one that I've made many times over the years. But looking at these projects, we've got a fiscal year 14 project that's marked completed that has $158,000 sitting there in it. We have a library project that is marked completed that has $198,000 sitting in it. I mean, there are a number of these. I don't understand why that money just sits there. Can't we do something to close those out?
So it
if
depends.
They're already.
Yep. So it depends. So on some of the ones where it says completed, if it's a grant, we need to wait until the state comes and audits the grant, and then we can close it out. And then just because it says, so the remaining balance of, say, that $158,000, that might be the remaining appropriation that we didn't need, but that doesn't mean that that's real money. So if we've only spent, say, $160,000 and we have $158,000 left, if it was bond funding, then we didn't bond for the entire $321,000, for example. So, I mean, it depends. It could be there, but likely if it's $158,000, that's the remaining appropriation, but that's not money sitting there.
Is it
So
in
is
the
there a
fund
way for us
balance, though?
to find out? Yeah.
Mhm.
If it's not,
Does it
it's
show
not-
up in?
Go ahead, Linda.
Go ahead, Rob.
I was just saying, I'm asking
I
the
think
same question. Is it, it may or may not be cash, but is it in the fund balance?
No. You mean the fund balance for like where your revenues minus your expenditures, or?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, no, it's not included in there. It's your remaining appropriation, but it's not included in your fund balance.
It's not in the general fund. It's not in reserves, you're saying.
Right.
So this is just a
So if
record-keeping spreadsheet about what we thought the project was going to cost, what we've spent, and what has been appropriated but not spent.
Right, exactly. So this is how much we thought the project was going to cost, and this is how much it ended up costing. This doesn't speak to the cash that actually went into the fund to pay for it.
So this is a tally board, not a financial statement.
Right.
Oh, that's okay. Very confusing. And can you give us something that shows the instances where there is cash sitting there waiting to be moved into something else? If it had,
Yeah, sure. I track that on a separate spreadsheet. I can provide that as well. But just know that we're
Okay.
more cash than we have outstanding. And by
Say that again. I'm sorry.
we're floating more cash than we have outstanding. So a lot of the projects have already, if the appropriation has been approved, we've already spent the money and we don't have the revenue to pay for it yet. So either we haven't bonded for it yet, we haven't received the grants for it. Pretty much the only things that have revenue associated with them is older projects or projects where the general fund has paid for it and it's a transfer that's done at the beginning of the year. So, and I'll show you that when I can send over that spreadsheet and I'll tell you at the bottom how much cash we're floating. But right now we're floating a few million in cash. So there's not cash just hanging out waiting for us to close.
darn.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Amy. Okay. Now try board.
Okay. So, this one I really wish Lisa was here, but she's done so much work in preparation for this. Let me just give you some context. I think in the past we've had general ideas about where we want to be going into the tri-board, and we've given them some expense caps. We wanted to put more structure around that this year, and so the guidelines, which we shared in draft form with you, I think last meeting, and I hope you've had a chance to look at, it gives a more detailed specific items that we think will impact our budgeting process, so that when we give them guidance, it's based on known and unknown factors that are coming into play. And so, there's a lot of information that goes into that. Our plan is to share that with both boards, and then explain some of the things that we want to try to get away from having those boards focus on what their budget how their budget might impact the mill rate, and have it focus more on how much the costs have gone up, and have it really be more of asking them to manage the expenditure budget, because we have some fairly impactful large decisions to make about the pension assumption rate, mortality tables, fund balance that we want at the end. But those should be the Board of Finance's call after we get a sense of where they are budget-wise. And so when we ask somebody to make an expense budget, we want to put it in the context of things that are relevant to the building of an expense budget, like how much has the population grown? How much has the grand list grown? What has been the consumer price index? How do our expenditures compare to other towns? Some benchmarking that information that we're providing them. And we know every year that we face the strong headwind of contractual salary and step bonuses or step increases at both the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen through union and non-union contracts alike, that on the face of them are greater than the where we hope to end up in terms of expenditures increase. So it's always a challenge, but we need to put it to them in that, and that's what we want to present at this tri-board meeting. And so this information is just to help them set the stage for what we think, why we think this in this particular year, like we say every year, but even more this year, that we have some really strong headwinds. And just to remind you that we did not adjust the pension rate last year, or we're at 675. We stayed at 675, right? And we want to get down to 650, 6.5. We did not implement the mortality rates adjustments. We think that something needs to be done.
And we did warn them that it would definitely happen this year.
Well, and we did all of that before, of course, the pandemic. But if you look at the stuff that Amy sent out this afternoon, and I apologize because I have 100 copies of different stuff, and I made a terrible mistake of printing on two sides of the paper, and now it's really hard to find. But if you look at the...
Want me to share it, Rob?
Yeah, that's better, please. Thank you. Amy always bails me out.
Which one do you want?
Start with the one that we did that Lisa had you do, the last one, the sort of budget summary and then the assumption sheet.
Go.
Okay, so this is like a top level look at, I think we call these fixed costs, right, Amy? So the Board of Selectmen's fiscal 21 budget, the $23 million is what we approved for the year we're in. And if you look at the fixed costs, and we'll drill down to that in just a minute. goes up to 23,886, and that's $800,000 change, which is 3.5% increase on that one line item to another. And the same for the Board of Ed, 3%. And then debt service, which is a big part of this, is up 28.8, and we'll go again through some of the major drivers of that. So you see that we're, expense budgets, just if, with the status quo fixed costs would be up 4.6%. We get help from the non-tax revenue being up, and we get help from grand list dollars, so that the net increase we would need to cover that budget would be 3.39%. That's leaving the pension at 675, is keeping the fund balance as where it is, and that would drive a mill rate of 39.16 compared to 37.18, I think.
38.28 today, I believe it is.
Does that include the fire though?
Yeah.
I think it does.
Yeah, so I think the 37 something is the comparable one. All right.
So
then
we're talking about going up to.
Rob, when you're talking about headwinds, I just wondered. I mean, we've signaled this in the past, but I'm struck by Board of Selectmen salaries and benefits up 3.15 and BOE up 3. I mean, is this a year to do that? I mean,
yeah,
it sounds like business as usual, and it's not business as usual.
Yeah, so you're exactly right, Art. And this conversation we have every year, and this conversation we're going to have at the tri-board meeting. These are a good percent, high percentage of these are driven by union contracts that have already been negotiated, and these are step increases, and it assumes no change in headcount, up or down. No new hires, no full-time, And so to me, there's a presumption that you keep all of the people, but if you can't afford it, you have to do one of two things. You have to renegotiate the contracts or have fewer employees. And it sounds cold to say that, but these contracts have increases that are double the cost, the consumer price index increase.
Okay, the coal of this year is what, 1.2?
1.2, 1.3 in that range.
Well, all right. I mean, I'm comfortable with that in a year in which citizens of Simsbury are losing their jobs, or, if you're in a profession, you're taking a cut in fees, but incomes are falling, and the Alice level is at 20%. I say let's start at 1.2 but I don't see going up to 3 and 3.15. No, I'm
not suggesting that's not what this is suggesting to do. In fact, I probably didn't tee this up right. I'm trying to get to the point where we come right back to what you're suggesting, Art.
Okay.
All right? Yeah.
Keep going then.
Yeah. Okay. No, I'm completely on the same page with you. I'm not an advocate of this, believe me. But I want you, and then ultimately the other two boards, to understand the other pieces that need to be layered in here. All right. So those increases are facing another headwind, which is that the mortality rates, we already know, people are living longer, and so that makes an adjustment to the ARC. The annual required contribution goes up further, and then down below. So you see that we get up to a 39.64 mill rate just to balance that budget. And and if we want to go all the way to the 6.5, like Linda had suggested we want. And so the impact on the town, the taxpayers, are these numbers that are shown down below at the mill rate. Now, I'm with you. I think we need to say that we need to get these expenditures down, and you do it either by renegotiating I think it's something like 75 to 80% of the total Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen is is from these negotiated salaries.
And
The only place to get any meaningful reduction. There are certain baseline things we need to do: plow the roads, things, police. All of these budgets are up. The police has a union. It's the head count. Those salaries all are going up faster than the inflation rate. So
and people often forget that the COLA on the salaries is in addition to a step increase. So, oftentimes you'll see in the newspaper, they're only getting a 2% COLA, but for most people, that's in addition to a step increase that might be another 2%. It's a lot more than anybody in the private sector is getting.
Right. Yeah. So the way the Board of Ed in particular has dealt with this is that they have a turnover of teachers that are at the very high level of salaries and steps who retire. And you hope that there are 10 to 12 of those a year, and they're replaced with people that come in at the bottom. And then that's how they get they're able to make this, if we've given 1.5%, 2.5% total expenditure caps in the past. And they last year they came in, the Board of Ed came in at about 2.3, I think, on a similar. But you have to be careful because there's a lot of stuff in the omelet that needs to be unscrambled.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like everybody to be comfortable with the information we're going to send in advance of the tri-board, and that the message we're going to send at the tri-board meeting is to focus on reduction in no higher increase in the total expenditures of these two budgets of some number in that 1.2–1.3% range.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd be interested in other people's input. You were great, Art. You went first before I even teed it up, so I appreciate that.
Okay, you owe me one. There we go.
Yeah.
No, I think you're on target also.
Yeah, so just to put it in context, correct me if I'm wrong, but the projected growth is in the budgets is double the projected grand list growth.
Correct. Yeah, the grand list. Can you put up the grand list fact sheet, Amy?
And it gets weaker and weaker in the coming years, the grand list.
Yeah, I take exception with some of those out years, Linda.
Yeah, right. It's hard to predict.
Yeah, it's very hard to predict, but I think if you focus out through 23, I think there's pretty good line of sight on that, but we're not getting the pop that we got from the solar field or any of those big apartment building. Well, it's in the top line number, real estate adjustments for development. So those are pretty flat numbers going out. We're not getting help from the grand list. I also don't believe that the personal property and motor vehicles are going to go down like that, but that doesn't really move the needle. All right. And then the other things that we provided today were the, I think we've already gone over that.
And I think it looks like you and Lisa put together the guiding principle statement. It was a pretty thorough document, and sums up a lot of what we communicate verbally, but have never written down for.
Yeah, and that was the point of it, was to say, look, we're not making these numbers up. We're trying to put this in total context of what should be doable. And I think, people that work in the private sector, know what it's been like. And Lisa talks a lot about the K-shaped recovery, and I think it's very appropriate to do that. There are people who have been unaffected, or in fact actually thrived is probably not the right word, but benefited. And then those that absolutely have been seen their lives devastated by this. Let's see. I'm just a couple of other questions from Lisa. So she asked the same question: how hard is the grand list number? I think, Amy, did you want to speak to who put that together and what it's based on?
Sorry, what was the question?
How firm do we feel? Do we think there's some growth potential in the grand list? It's not going to be enough to go from 1.5 to 3, or 1.3 to 3.
Yeah, I think those are estimates, and those are based on what our assessor knows now. So do I think that there's probably a little bit more room? Yes. To what extent, I honestly have no idea.
There's also a suggestion that we continue as we have to separate out costs that are specifically related to COVID and COVID expenses. That I think there is, on the flip side of that, is that there are people that recognize the issues and things that are being dealt with by the town that are extraordinary, and that we need to do what we can to make sure that we take care of the townspeople and the employees and everything else we can, but that any extraordinary expenses then would be hopefully fade away as the pandemic fades away and the costs associated with that. So I think we should continue to do separate out those costs. And then
one other comment.
Yeah, please.
Last year we ended up with kind of a surplus because I think there were several hires that were made late, or not late, but their positions were left open longer than was budgeted for, and so as a result there were some savings. And so that's when we're talking about labor costs, there's also an opportunity there. If they did it last year, maybe there's some opportunity there to make some reductions. Amy, were there assumptions already made to build in the potential that when somebody leaves, you don't hire a new person the very next day? It always takes a couple months to fill the position, so that you could leave some savings there.
So typically there is a span of time in between. It's just we don't know typically when somebody's going to leave and
who's leaving. Sure.
Right.
Of
and
course.
Then even for, the new positions that we project, sometimes we have to go out, 2 or even 3 times sometimes to get, solid candidates. So that's always longer than anticipated. Sometimes you get it on the first shot and you get a great candidate, and other times you go back out. So there's just so many variables there. And then, if we put concessions in for those variables, and then say we do get the person on the first shot, then we're going to be coming back saying we need more money. So it's a balance.
So we have some other detailed information on the debt service. So there's a huge we're going to have a big issue over capital going forward. And I think, the projects that are coming along, the Board of Ed, Latimer Lane and Henry James projects, again, it just seems like this is not the time to be getting too far ahead of these and the bonding. We need to have a real wholesome prioritization of capital projects. And not to single out Meadowood, but it just speaks to all of the other things that are going on about trying to get the budget balanced and knowing that that's a big part of that. And, we can show you the graphs, basically assuming just maintenance expenses, and then on up to including the timeline that is, I sort of out of the Tecton plan, and it puts us way over our debt service cap in 2 or 3 years. Do you want to show those, Amy? I guess we can show a couple. I'm glad to share these with you guys, but it's going to require that we look at what we can build, what we can fix, when we can do it, and when we should bond for it. And the timelines are, so this looks fine. This just says that we're not going to borrow any more money. Okay, we can't. So that's not quite the real world.
So I just want to make a comment. I can't really see I can't at all see what you're looking at since I'm only on the phone. But the whole Board of Ed construction capital needs, to me, was always a little bit backwards. That instead of figuring out how much money is available, and therefore then go, okay, if there's $98,000 available, go figure out how best to spend that. As opposed to coming in and saying, well, these are all the things we want. Now we want you to figure out how on earth to, tax people more to pay for it all. It just seems a little backwards, or at least the two ought to be happening at the same time. And I just would ask that we do the work of figuring out, and I know we've been waiting to also hear from the Board of Selectmen side what their capital needs are in the coming 10 years, because we can't overlook that. I just feel like this $150 million nut hanging out there is just not realistic. I mean, my that's just my gut telling me they need to go back to the drawing board and figure out what really is the most important part that needs to be done and focus on that. I just don't see how we do all of that. But I also don't see how anybody can plan without knowing what's the availability of capital over the coming years, given some reasonable set of assumptions that doesn't drive every taxpayer crazy.
Yeah, so you're right. You're completely right. And the we always end up doing this. We make long-term decisions based on how far we can see out, which is usually less than 5 years. And right now, the Henry James, 6th grade at the Henry James and the Latimer Lane projects spread out even over 5 years, or the next 3 to 5 years. It takes that long to build them and bond them. Why don't you show that? So just show them the worst one. You'll be able to hear Barb Pettigrew screaming from the Cape.
Or Florida. And my guess is that leaves nothing for all of the Board of Selectmen projects that we have yet to hear about.
Well, yeah, so these are the projects spread out, and you can see by 2026, 27, 28, we're way up over the 10% debt service target line if we were to build the things that are in the current budget. But not to totally despair, if you spread them out and you don't do everything that people want to do, then it's possible to do some of it, not all of it. It's never possible to do all of it. But that's why we need.
That's my point.
Yeah, we need to put together a long-range plan. I mean, this is where we started 2.5, 3 years ago when we commissioned the project, the Tecton project. But it's too big and it's too soon. And people would argue, oh, we can do it over 15 years. I don't think we can do all of it over 15 years. not and finance it in 10 or 15-year bonds. Some of this is even bonded at 20 years, the big projects.
Chairman, if given that comment, I just come back to a point that Lisa made, is some sense of prioritization would be a big help.
It has to happen.
I mean, if we may have to look and say, this is your wish list. We understand that. We can't do the wish list, but given the priorities that you have ranked, we will go this far up the scale.
I think we're going to need, in addition to the tri-board meeting for the operating budget, we're going to need a tri-board meeting for capital prioritization. It has to be done. It has to be done. We've been kicking the can down the road for a long time.
And do we yet have a date that we can expect the master plan for the Board of Selectmen's, sort of equivalent capital needs list? I mean, they've been working at this for a couple of years now to say, okay, well, in such and such a year, this building needs a new roof and that one's going to need a new furnace. None of those things are on the capital list right now, but we know they're going to be needed.
I can answer that, Linda. So,
we have no idea.
Yep. So I was talking to Tom Roy, and it is going to be ready for this budget cycle. So they're anticipating December to be ready to present in January.
Yeah, the sooner the better.
Yeah, we look forward to that. All right, so I think we need to prepare. The tri-board meeting is on December,
November 30th.
November 30th, okay. So.
And what time is it? It's
5:30.
Is it 5:45?
No, 5:30.
5:30, okay.
Yeah.
So I think we need a crisp message to the other boards to go with this, and I'm hearing a consensus in the 1.5 or less range for the operating budget, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah. All right. I've got some work to do to get ready for that meeting. A few slides and preps, but we're gonna share the guidelines with the other two boards, and any other information that they want from us, we would be glad to share. Right?
Of course.
Okay. And as you get through all of that information we've sent over, you have questions. Again, kudos to Amy, who cranks these things out at a moment's notice. And believe me, among the chair and vice chair, there are lots and lots of questions every day. And even some of them are from the chair. But Lisa's done a great job on this, and Amy has really done amazing work to pull all of this together. The benchmarking and other information that we can share as part of this package, I think, is really important. We didn't just make this number up. Okay?
It was a good package.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Moving on. And I've long since lost my agenda. What's next?
Proposed meeting dates.
Yeah.
Hey, Rob, if I may.
You may.
I think it's important that we set the context of not just relating that 1.5, less than 1.5 to a COLA increase. It's more broad than that. We have to set the stage of what really is happening out there, where 97% of Connecticut businesses are small businesses. And nearly 80%, if not more, have requested help under the PPP plan. And there's no line of sight to any additional type of funding of the CARES Act. Like, let's make it clear that this isn't just about a COLA.
Completely. Yes.
Oh yeah.
So yeah. I mean, and I could go on and on and on. Reduced revenues at the state level. I mean, I won't start, but I mean, there is a bigger picture here that everybody has to get out of this Simsbury bubble, and Simsbury people are going to be affected by So I just want to set the backdrop and the theme.
No, I think that's great. Absolutely. And I may lean on all of you. I thought Art's introduction today was exactly right. That's the message.
Yeah.
This is not the year to be giving status quo raises across the board.
Yeah, that's all.
Much deeper than that.
I agree with Derek. Yeah.
I just want to echo what Derek said too, in terms of really, sharing all the work that you guys, Rob and Lisa, have done in terms of looking at many different metrics and sharing that whole context. I think Art and I were both a little taken aback at one of the committee meetings on Parks and Recs when one other member of the committee went on a rant about how we just picked numbers out of the air. And it was like, we do not just pick numbers out of the air. There is thought behind this, but there was no convincing them. So I think it's really important that it's clear that, that these are not just random numbers that we happen to pick because we like that number.
Right. Completely agree. Okay. We have a slate of dates for meetings in 2021. Fine with me.
Second. Yeah, it's fine.
I think Kevin's going to have a client meeting on one of those nights. But all right, so let's post those and go with it. Board of Education quarterly report. Do we need it?
I have that.
Yeah, we do.
Share my screen. So this probably looks a little bit different than what it has in the past, and most of it was probably from my own learning experience. And I thought, if nothing else, Art could learn from it as well, since he's the newbie. But I just had them list out a brief description of the grants that the Board of Education gets and what they're used for. And then I had them list out what our award is this year compared to last year. And that just helped me kind of like get through what all of their funding sources are. So since they did the work anyways, I thought I would just share it. So I'll just go through some of the bigger items on the revenue side. So the open choice grant, you'll see that there was a decrease of about $93,000. And this is just because there is a decrease in students. So we get $8,000 per student. In addition, there's typically a second appropriation in the spring that we get. But we don't know if we're getting it, so it's just not included in here. So chances are that number will come up. We just don't know to what extent. And then the only other one that had like a significant change was the IDEA grant, and that increased about $35,000 compared to the prior year, which is actually a pretty significant increase if you look from year to year in their contributions. So some good news there. And then moving down onto expenditures, I had them change it up a little bit. Typically, you'll see the budget, the year to date, and then the percent. For me, it's just hard to get a sense of a percentage if you're not seeing the dollar value associated with it. So again, it's just more for my learning curve and my the way I understand things. So I just had them include it here as well. So typically, the variances from last year to this year, as you can imagine, are the majority COVID related. So I'll just talk about the ones that aren't COVID related. And I will point out here that the instruction line here, that increase does relate to the 5 teachers that Neil spoke about earlier. And then on the insurance and pension side of things, you'll see that there was an increase of about $121,000. And this was just the increase related to their annual required contribution for the pension, which was budgeted for. So that's why you're seeing that significant dollar change in that line item. And then the last one I was going to point out is the out of district tuition. It's showing like about $170,000 variance from last year to this year. And it just so happened last year we paid out a large tuition payment at the beginning of the school year that we haven't paid out this year. So it was just the timing of payments. There was nothing more there. So that's just a brief summary of where the board is, other than, the COVID related items which we went through in the finance director's report and, the driving force in their budget this year. Any other questions related to the Board of Education's quarterly?
Good. And then the savings initiatives.
Yeah, so this is just the same thing that we put together for the Board of Education. Theirs wasn't ready for the last meeting when we had put together the town items. So if you all have had a chance to review, if you have any questions.
I think we all benefit from one of the big savings is that Amy is now doing both jobs, Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen, and it's doing a fabulous job. We're all sorry for the circumstances that led to that, but it does make one of the great synergies we have. So we really appreciate that.
Amy, just a quick question. It's on the saving initiatives. It says, is that $1 million savings to support distance learning?
Yeah, so those were the reallocated teachers that Neil talked about. Instead of using the specialists at their current function, they now became teachers this year.
Okay.
And, so we didn't have to hire those additional bodies.
Okay. Just money not. Okay. All right. Thank you.
You know, it's I won't say it. It's happening. You know, when you go shopping and you get stuff on sale, you say, "Look how much I saved."
Like,
All right. Anything else for the good of the cause? No other reports tonight. All right. I may lean out or lean on you guys. I certainly like our full team to participate at the tri-board, just like Derek, you and Art suggested, Kevin and Linda. And, you know, because there'll be, predictable pushback on all of this always. I think there'll be an understanding, but then we'll hear about the realities of the people that are already employed and what they are entitled to and the like. So, you know, it's important that we work on this together. That's why we try to do it, you know, face to face at the board meeting. Where are we doing it? At the library? No, we're just doing Zoom. We're doing Zoom, I guess.
yeah.
Stupid. Yeah. What was I thinking?
Easy to say no, but we're gonna have to at some point.
Yeah, it's our job.
Yep.
All right. Appreciate everybody's contribution. Linda, safe travels down south.
All right.
Will you be back on the 30th?
Tomorrow.
Oh, you okay?
Yes, we're heading home tomorrow.
All right. Great. Safe.
All right.
Safe
Take
trip.
care, guys.
All right. Think about
Bye-bye.
Lisa. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye.